In the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus looked toward the easternmost reaches of the Persian Empire and described the people living there as the bravest of all the Indians. Herodotus was recording a frontier judgment. He saw a people whose resistance had hardened into a permanent habit, making them an expensive liability for any administrator in the Persian capital. These were regions where imperial rule weakened, and the costs of control far outweighed the benefits of tax. This was frontier bravery, a specific survival mechanism born in a rugged geography. In these mountains, submission to an empire meant certain poverty, while violent independence offered the only path to autonomy. To the ancient empires mapping the world, courage served as a political indicator. It marked the exact boundary where imperial discipline ended and local tribal law began. For millennia, this condition was the region's greatest asset. These tribes, living in what is now eastern Afghanistan and northwestern Pakistan, outlasted a sequence of world-conquering powers, from Alexander the Great to the Mughals. Today, that same terrain is the center of a different reality. The ancestral home of the bravest is now globally defined by decades of insurgency, societal dislocation, and the rise of the Taliban. This raises a difficult question about the nature of survival. We have to look at how a people who were never fully conquered became trapped in a cycle of modern tragedy. Societies shaped by permanent external pressure often develop a defensive, violent independence. Over centuries, this survival mechanism can become so rigid that it prevents the very adaptations needed to thrive in a world governed by institutions rather than arms. In the ancient world, the frontier possessed a selective permeability. Invading groups like the Scythians or the White Huns would arrive as conquerors, but they were eventually absorbed into the local tribal society. The region absorbed outside influences on its own terms. It blended Hellenistic artistic forms with local religious ideas, producing the distinct Greco-Buddhist style seen in these Gandharan sculptures. Courage in this era was entirely defensive. It was the tool used to maintain honor and protect the kinship structures that held society together in the absence of a central state. Ancient empires respected this dynamic because power was honest and physical. When rule was personal and loyalty was negotiated, armed resistance was the primary currency of political life. This ancient cycle of assimilation stopped with the arrival of the British Empire. The British did not seek to integrate the Pashtun heartlands. Instead, they chose to manage, contain, and militarize them, treating the entire region as a strategic buffer zone. The 1901 Frontier Crimes Regulation was a mechanism for strategic immobilization, preserving tribal authority as a wall against Russian expansion. While British India developed modern infrastructure like railways and universities, the frontier was deliberately kept in a state of arrested development. By refusing to submit, the frontier preserved its autonomy, but it remained a buffer rather than a participant in the modern world. The region emerged into the 20th century without the institutional depth required to navigate a technological era. This historical asymmetry became a crisis during the Cold War. In 1979, the unmodernized frontier became the front line of a global struggle following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. External powers, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, realized they could extract and exploit the region's ancient defensive courage. Bravery was no longer a tool for local autonomy. It was nobilized, sanctified, and funded for a global proxy war. The internal social structure of the frontier was reoriented. The courage Herodotus noticed centuries earlier was now being pulled away from the defense of tribal honor and toward a permanent ideological insurgency. The human result was the destruction of the very society that bravery was meant to protect. Generations were uprooted, and traditional villages were replaced by displacement and the ideology of the refugee camp. The frontier was mastered through its own strengths. By funding and sanctifying traditional courage, outside powers redirected an ancient defensive shield into a resource for global conflict. The rise of the Taliban in the 1990s represents the final outcome of a society denied the tools of modern statecraft. It was an attempt to impose order through the only means left available: absolute religious certainty and violence. When a culture is systematically isolated from the development of bureaucracy, science, and law, its survival mechanisms are forced to become more extreme. Physical resistance becomes the only way to engage with a world that feels increasingly foreign. In the ancient world, physical bravery was enough, because power was measured in arms. In the modern world, power is measured in institutional capacity and technological competence, areas where the frontier was deliberately left behind. This creates a terminal condition. In a globalized world, the very courage that once commanded imperial respect becomes a liability if it cannot be translated into the language of modern administration. The Pashtun experience represents a civilizational friction at the edge of empires. It is the story of a people who adapted endlessly to the pressures of history, that were never permitted to evolve on their own terms. Survival now depends on converting personal honor into institutional stability. The resilience that once fueled armed resistance must be reoriented toward building the schools and legal systems that define a modern state. History has left the frontier at a crossroads, where the old weapons of autonomy no longer provide security. The endurance that once defied empires must now be focused on the classroom, the one place where the next generation can build a future that bravery alone can no longer secure.